Boyd. Up next on Think, the myth of meritocracy in America and how it actually harms the very people it's meant to motivate. We'll spend this hour with Harvard philosopher Michael Sandel talking about the religious origins of our belief that we're all free to rise as high as our natural talents will take us as long as we are willing to work hard. The flip side of that confidence is the assumption that those who struggle financially, professionally, or socially must have done something to deserve that fate, which ironically makes us less inclined to care about those who face disadvantages. Our conversation starts after a short break.
Support for KERA comes from you, our members, and from the Texas Secretary of State, providing voters details on which approved forms of photo ID they can take to the polls. More at votetexas.gov or 800-252-VOTE. Funding for Think comes from the University of Texas at Dallas, celebrating 50 years and ranked first among Texas public universities for value by Forbes. More information at utdallas.edu/bright. UT Dallas, moving at the speed of bright.
There once was a black girl born in Jim Crow, Mississippi, to an unwed teenage mother. She endured rural poverty and years of sexual abuse as a child, then gave birth herself at the age of 14 to a premature baby who died soon after birth. But that girl applied her extraordinary talent and work ethic to building a different life for herself and grew up to be the multi-billionaire head of a media empire that bears her iconic first initial today, O. We love Oprah Winfrey in part because we think of her as a kind of only in America inspiration. If Oprah can succeed, we tell ourselves, anybody can. Except it's not actually true. From KERA in Dallas, this is Think. I'm Krys Boyd. Most of the millions of American children living in poverty now will be poor for the rest of their lives. Most of the ones being raised with money will stay pretty rich. And as long as we tell ourselves that success is something we earn by competing on a level playing field, there is precious little incentive to do anything about that. Philosopher Michael J. Sandel is here to talk about it. He is Ann T. and Robert M. Bass Professor of Government at Harvard University. His new book is The Tyranny of Merit: What's Become of the Common Good. Michael, welcome to Think.
Thank you, Krys. Good to be with you.
Lots of people were bothered by the college admissions scandals that came to light a few months ago. We disapprove, right, of outright cheating your way into a top school. Most of us disapprove of side door advantages for students whose families, give a lot of money to get them in. But you believe even front door admissions gained by SAT scores and grades are not purely about talent and hard work. Why not?
If we look at the SAT scores, they track almost perfectly with family income. The higher your family income, the more likely you are to score well on the SAT. And it's not surprising why. We know that affluent parents can do a lot to help their kids succeed. And we can hardly blame them for that, the parents and the kids, because so much hangs on it now. But there are a lot of kids who can't afford to take SAT prep courses or to go on expensive trips abroad during the summer to do good works to pile up credentials for their resume. The result, even at colleges and universities that have generous financial aid policies, take the Ivy League universities, for example, there are more students on these campuses from the top 1% than from the entire bottom half of the country combined, Krys. So what that shows is we're not really living up to the meritocratic ideals we profess.
So some people might say we're just not doing a good job of enforcing a pure meritocracy. How does meritocracy reinforce unfair systems even when it works as intended?
Right. That's the really hard question. And the argument I make in the book is that even if we could have a perfectly level playing field, even if we could find ways to counterbalance the advantages of kids from affluent families, even a perfect meritocracy would not make for a just society. And that's the harder claim. And the reason is that meritocracy has a dark side because it sends a certain message about success. It says if chances are equal, then those who land on top deserve their success and deserve all of the material rewards that we shower upon the winners. And by implication, that those who struggle, those left behind, they must deserve their fate as well. This attribution of responsibility to the winners and the losers for their fate leads to a kind of polarization in our society. It leads to hubris among the winners and humiliation among the losers. And I think this accounts for a lot of the roiling resentments that have upended since 2016.
Yeah, you write here about the origins of working and middle class resentment of elites. I guess we should start by talking about who these elites are.
Well, for the most part, they are members of the professional classes who have a four-year college degree. In fact, the whole message over the last 4 decades, message from across the political spectrum, from Democrats and Republicans alike, was this: we will embrace globalization. We will embrace a market-driven version of globalization. And yes, it will produce winners and losers. And yes, the divide between winners and losers grew deeper and deeper, greater inequality. But this was the message: if you want to compete and win in the global economy, go to college, get a degree from a brand name university if you can, and then you too will have a chance through upward individual mobility to rise. That was the message. But that message contained an implicit insult that those who offered it didn't fully realize. The implicit insult was this: if you didn't go to college, and if you're not flourishing in the new economy, your failure must be your fault. This, I think, is one powerful source of the resentments, the grievances, the sense of elites looking down that Trump and other populist figures have managed to tap into.
Our meritocratic morality even plays into the ways that we treat people who get sick, right? The ways we blame people who get sick with so-called lifestyle diseases. We talk about personal responsibility and choices.
Right. And personal responsibility is a good thing up to a point. Part of what it means to respect people as free citizens is to respect their human agency, their ability to shape their fate and their circumstances. But personal responsibility extended to where we land in life can be corrosive of the common good, because if we really believe that we are personally responsible for whether we fall ill, whether we fall victim to this or that medical condition or disease, much less our economic circumstance, that essentially means that those who flourish, those who have enjoy good health or wealth, they come to think of it as the measure of their merit, as a sign of their virtue. And by implication, those who struggle, whether with ill health or with economic difficulties, that must somehow indicate that they have failed, that they have no one to blame but themselves. This is the dark side that has always shadowed the inspiring side of meritocracy, which tells us you can make it if you try.
I was really excited to read in this book your examination of the word deserve and the ways that it has really crept into all aspects of American life. It's a word that I've always been uncomfortable with. And you note that starting in the 80s, presidents began to use the word deserve in speaking to the American people, as in certain people deserve to rise because their behavior makes them worthy. How does that view of deserving desensitize us to the suffering of those who can't or don't rise above poverty?
Well, it's a great question, Krys, and I'm tempted, as a philosopher and as a teacher, my temptation is sometimes to ask a question back. When you say you've been uncomfortable by it, can you just say a word about why? What makes you uncomfortable about it?
Sure. I mean, I feel like I've been successful in my own career, and I have a happy family. And occasionally someone will say, well, you deserve this. You've worked hard. And I really don't know that I've worked any harder than, the woman who cleans this building for us, or lots of other people who don't get the kind of recognition that I've received. And so I don't know that I deserve anything that has happened to me. I've just been very lucky.
Right. Well, luck is an important moral counterweight to an inflated notion of desert. So I think you've put it very powerfully. And I think what's happened in our society, you mentioned, and I tracked this in the rhetoric of presidents over the years, speaking in the language of desert, you deserve this or that. We now take it for granted. It's a trope of our politics, of our public discourse, used by Democrats and Republicans alike. People should get what they deserve. The talented deserve to get ahead. Those who work hard deserve to get ahead. This language of desert and deservingness is a relatively recent thing. It really only enters public discourse, in presidential discourse, in the last 4 decades. And I even looked at the use of you deserve as a phrase in newspapers, in the New York Times. It soared during these same decades of market-driven globalization, of deepening inequality. And I think it's more than a coincidence that the age of deepening inequality came along with a greater rhetorical emphasis on you deserve. It's almost as if those who landed on top needed to persuade themselves, or to be persuaded, that they deserved their fate, that their success was their own doing, they belonged there, that they deserved the material rewards and the social honor and recognition that came with it. And so the language of desert has accelerated dramatically over the last 4 decades. And it stands for this idea that, Krys, you find disquieting, as I do as well. The idea that we deserve our fate. And what it misses is the role of luck in life. If the successful inhale too deeply of their own success, there's a tendency to forget the luck and good fortune that helped us on our way. And this ultimately makes us, I think, less alive to the needs of others. And I think it dulls our sense of responsibility and duty to look after those less fortunate, less credentialed than us. And this is the way in which it chips away gradually, this confidence that the successful deserve their success. It chips away at the possibility of a politics of the common good, of caring for those less fortunate than ourselves.
Sure, because if we have done well and been successful, we assume we deserve that, and therefore it's the other people's problem to sort of get to where they want to be rather than our own.
Right. Pull up your socks, lift yourself up. I lifted myself up, but what that forgets is that whatever success the winners enjoy is indebted in a great many ways to circumstances that the successful come to overlook or to forget. Family, neighborhood, teachers, coaches, country, life circumstances, living in this time rather than in some other time. Take a very concrete example. great sports star like LeBron James. He worked very hard to develop his skills, but he's a greatly gifted athlete. Now, is it really his doing that he is as gifted an athlete as he is? And more than that, is it his doing that he lives at a time and in a society where we love basketball? If you look back in the Renaissance, they weren't so crazy about basketball. They cared more about fresco painters.
All right, let me jump in here. We have to take a quick break. My guest is philosopher Michael J. Sandel. His book is The Tyranny of Merit: What's Become of the Common Good.
Funding for Think comes from TCU, where faculty do research for the greater good, like Professor Dean Williams, who uses genetic mapping to help save the horned lizard from extinction. TCU, lead on.
This is Think. I'm Krys Boyd. My guest this hour, philosopher Michael J. Sandel, is Ann T. and Robert M. Bass, professor of government at Harvard University and author of The Tyranny of Merit: What's Become of the Common Good. Michael, just before the break, you were talking about the great LeBron James being fortunate enough to be great at basketball in a moment when being great at basketball makes you very rich and very famous in the United States. What assumptions does American meritocracy make about the relationship between the market value of what somebody does and the value to society?
Krys, we very often slide into the assumption that the money people make is the measure of their contribution to the common good. But this is a mistake, because we're aware throughout our lives of many cases where there is a mismatch between the market's verdict on what really does count as a valuable contribution and any judgment that you or I or people reflecting on it might make. Take a simple example. Did you see the television series Breaking Bad?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember? There was a school teacher, the hero of the show, the guy who breaks bad, starts out as a high school chemistry teacher. And he doesn't make much money. His finances are stretched. Long story short, he becomes a meth cook. He makes very good methamphetamines and makes millions. Now, I think almost nobody would say that though the market says his contribution as a meth dealer is thousands of times greater than his contribution as a high school chemistry teacher, few people would say that cooking meth really is a more valuable contribution to society than teaching kids in high school. And this is true throughout our economy. So what I think we need to do, a part of questioning the single-minded embrace of a kind of market-defined notion of merit and success, is to open up a public debate about what counts as contributing to the common good. And I think this debate, it's actually beginning now with the pandemic, when we are seeing those of us who have the luxury of working from home, working remotely, we realize how deeply we depend on workers we often overlook. I'm thinking not just of the people working in hospitals, but of delivery people, grocery store clerks, warehouse workers, home healthcare providers. These are not the best paid or the most honored workers in our society, but now we're calling them, rightly, essential workers. So this could be the beginning of a broader public debate about how to bring a greater alignment between the contributions that people make and the rewards and also the social respect and dignity that we accord them.
We've also said throughout the pandemic that we're all in this together, but it's really not true. The risk is not equally shared by everyone.
And this, too, can be this dissonance. This recognition can, I think, be the beginning of a broader public debate about the common good, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. Everyone was saying, we are all in this together. Politicians said it, celebrities were saying it, advertisers were using this slogan. We are all in this together. And yet we knew and we know that that isn't the way things actually work in our society. Some of us can work from home, holding meetings on Zoom, while others have little choice but to risk their health and that of their family by going out in and working in the various jobs that the rest of us depend on. And so I think that this phrase, "we are all in this together," gestures toward an aspiration to the common good, to a politics of the common good. But we are far from that way of thinking about the economy in our society. And this is partly because the divide between winners and losers has deepened in recent decades, and we've become so reliant on markets to tell us what counts as valuable. And the result is that hedge fund managers and high-speed traders enjoy enormous prestige, never mind material reward, whereas people who actually work hard to produce valuable goods and services in the real economy, I think there's a widespread sense that their work is no longer valued in the same kind of way. And that I think is what our public life needs to address.
How did Western society start thinking about merit through the lens of Christian doctrine and our sort of Calvinistic prospects for salvation?
It's very interesting. When I was writing the book, I began by thinking about our current debates about merit and success and winning and losing, which have largely to do with who makes the most money, who enjoys the greatest prestige. But then, as I looked into it, Krys, I found that these debates about merit go all the way back to debates in Christian theology about salvation. And the debate was, is salvation something that we earn through faithful service and good work during our lifetimes? Or is salvation a gift of grace, a gift of God's grace? And this was an enormously contentious theological debate. Merit versus grace is the way to salvation. And it ran right through the early Christian thinkers up to the Reformation, when and then to the Calvinists who came to America, the Puritans, believing that salvation was a matter of grace, not merit, not something we earn. And yet, the Protestant work ethic, as Max Weber described, the Protestant work ethic took over and gradually displaced this idea that we have no hand in our salvation. At first, it taught that worldly success, material success, signified hard work, which in turn was a sign that we had been saved. That was the first Calvinist picture. But gradually, hard work and material success came to be seen as a source of salvation, a way of earning it. And so we're playing out a similar debate today between the role of merit and the role, if not God's grace, the role of luck in determining who succeeds. But the tension between merit and grace is deeply inscribed in Western culture.
So in my part of the country, which is, the heartland, sometimes when you ask somebody how they're doing, they'll reply, "I am blessed." And it's an interesting expression to me because it can be, an utterance of gratitude, right, for blessings that we sense we may not deserve. It can also be an assertion that we are pretty sure we're doing something right.
Exactly. It captures exactly this tension, this double meaning of being blessed. Am I blessed through the grace of God outside my own doing, sinner though I may be? Or am I blessed in the sense that my health and my wealth signify my being right with God, my superior virtue. And this, so this is a contemporary expression of that very same tension, and we see it in the famous song, "America the Beautiful." God, you remember one of the stanzas, God shed his grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood. Now, a lot of Americans hear that song as saying, God shed his grace, already did shed his grace.
Has shed, uh-huh.
Yes, has shed already as a statement of fact. And there's the hubristic side of merit. We are great because we are good. But the original lyric is not a statement of fact, it's a prayer. It's an aspiration. May God shed his grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. But our very tendency to hear those lyrics, that familiar patriotic anthem, as announcing a fait accompli, that we already have been graced, that America is great because it is good, that's the hubristic side of merit. And in recent decades, it's tended to crowd out the aspirational side, the element of grace or luck, as depending on one's religious and theological views.
And on the flip side of that, I suppose, is the belief that people who are harmed by acts of God, by natural disasters, are somehow being punished for failing to live up to some kind of moral standard. So you get Franklin Graham blaming wicked Mardi Gras celebrations for Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans.
Exactly. This is an ancient impulse that when a natural disaster strikes, an earthquake, a hurricane, a drought, there is still alive the reflex to say, we must have done something to deserve it. And then, in the case of Franklin Graham, to identify, or Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, they have explained natural disasters in these moralistic terms as punishments for sin, rather than as natural events. And this too reflects this ancient impulse to assume that everything that happens either as a reward for virtue or as a punishment for sin. And when this impulse, this way of thinking about natural disasters, let's say, is transposed into the economy, it takes a similar form. It reinforces the idea that the rich are rich because they are more deserving than the poor. That's the implication for the economy and for the way we view winning and losing in material terms. And they're closely akin, this thoroughgoing, quite harsh ethic of success with regard to merit.
This is Think. I'm Krys Boyd. It's worth underlining the fact that, when it comes to those preachers, they're not saying we must have done something to deserve it, by the way. They are saying you must have done something to deserve it.
Yes, exactly. And this brings out how this attribution of responsibility or guilt for sin, in their case, is corrosive of solidarity, of mutual responsibility, and of the common good. Because if the reason they, quote unquote, they are suffering is because they are sinful, because they brought God's wrath upon themselves, or they brought their ill health and their poverty on themselves, if that's the reason for their condition, then it's very hard to believe that we are all in this together. and therefore have a responsibility to care for them or to help them. It sharpens the divide, actually, this way of thinking and reasoning between us and them, between the successful and the unsuccessful, between the winners and the losers. If the losers are losers because it's their fault, because they have no one but themselves to blame, because they are sinners, or because they don't work hard, then it's very hard to summon any sense of solidarity or mutual obligation to look after one another.
How do
And if
America...
I could just
Please
add, Krys,
Mhm.
if I could just add, this is why I call the book The Tyranny of Merit. The tyranny of merit is a discordant phrase, I understand, because we think of merit as an inspiring ideal, that if you work hard and if you exercise talents, you should get ahead. But what we've just now been discussing, and which you've been kind of pointing to, is precisely the way in which a thoroughgoing notion of merit and of meritocracy undermines the common good and exerts a certain kind of tyranny, a tyranny of judgment by the successful against those who struggle. Sorry for that.
No, thank you. I want to go to the phones now. We have Rick calling from San Antonio. Hi, Rick.
Hi, thanks for the call. I wanted to maybe ask some questions about the underlying theme that I'm hearing in your guest's approach to the topic, and it almost feels like he is a victim to a variation on the very theme he's describing, and he's talking about how a meritocracy creates and leads to a resentment of those that aren't successful. And there's a theme in his conversation that sounds like a resentment of those that are successful. And I'm not convinced. It seems too cynical to say that those that do have the luck and the ability to be successful generically and almost universally look down on those that aren't. There may be some of that. But my sense is that those are two separate issues, that a meritocracy can be very successful at creating winners, and we may have other cultural norms that either do or don't allow us to feel humility and empathy for those that aren't successful. But I'm not convinced they're connected, and I think it's way too cynical to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
All right, Rick, I'm really glad you called. I have to take a break right now. We'll get a response from Michael to your interesting points in just a moment. My guest this hour is philosopher Michael J. Sandel of Harvard University. His new book is called The Tyranny of Merit: What's Become of the Common Good. We'll be right back. You're listening to Think. I'm Krys Boyd. My guest this hour is philosopher Michael J. Sandel, who is Ann T. and Robert M. Bass Professor of Government at Harvard and author of a new book called The Tyranny of Merit: What's Become of the Common Good. You'll remember, Michael, before the break we heard from Rick, who, I hope I'm summarizing this in a way he would think is accurate, had some concerns that it's maybe unfair to assume all successful people are somehow ungrateful and judgmental of those who haven't been successful.
I think that Rick raises a very important point. And so let me take advantage of Rick's insight to emphasize that I don't think, I agree with him, not all successful people look down on those who are less fortunate. Not all successful people are hubristic in the way that I Worry a Meritocratic Society encourages. So I think Rick is right about that. Rick also raised an interesting, in passing, suggestion that there may be other sources of humility that can counteract the tendency for elites to look down. And were Rick still on the line, I would love to explore what he sees these other sources of humility as being. But I think one important source of humility when we're thinking about attitudes towards success is that the successful be keenly aware of the role of luck in their lives, and that they be indebted and aware of their indebtedness to those who have helped them on their way, because appreciating the role of luck in life is one powerful source of humility. It enables us to say, or invites us to reflect on the possibility that there, but for the accident of birth or the grace of God or the mystery of fate or the luck of the draw, go I. And this can prompt a kind of humility and a sense of responsibility for those who are less fortunate. The one thing I would say to Rick, looking at our public culture as a whole, which is what I try to do in the book, I would say that one of the reasons the deepening inequality of recent decades has proven to be so intractable, I think, is related to this structure of belief and justification that has come along with it. The belief that the winners and losers have been defined in ways that reflect their merit. I think this is part, along with the power elements of power in this whole story, I think it's part of why we haven't been able to make much of a dent in the inequality of recent decades. But I think Rick's basic point that not everyone who's successful does look down on the less fortunate, I think that's very important and true.
Something you point out here is that education can be a barrier to access to public office. So something like 1 in 4 U.S. adults have a bachelor's degree or higher, but very close to 100% of the folks who get elected to Congress and the Senate and who hold high-ranking positions in government are among that 27% of adults. And you're not saying that you don't want people who know what they're talking about to be in positions of power, but you do have concerns about the ways that power is limited to people who have a formal education.
Yes, and it's striking that in the last several decades in the US, looking at the executive and looking at the executive branch and at Congress, looking at state legislatures, but also in Britain and much of Western Europe, parliaments are overwhelmingly dominated by those with university degrees, whereas the majority of populations in the US and in Europe and Britain do not have 4-year university degrees. And we've not really taken account of this. In fact, so essentially the credentialed few govern the uncredentialed, if you can use that term, many. And along with this, relatively few people who come from blue-collar backgrounds now can be found in Congress or in the parliaments of Britain or of Europe. And while it's generally a good thing to be governed by people who know what they're talking about, I think we have overestimated technocratic expertise, and we have underemphasized the importance of sound practical judgment, a concern for the common good, and the ability to identify with people from all walks of life. And these qualities of leadership and of governance are not necessarily taught or learned in universities. They emerge from life experiences. And so I think we need to think seriously about representation, political representation, and how skewed it has become.
All right, so you teach at Harvard. You're not in the admissions department, but you're aware, and you've mentioned already in this conversation that, a significant percentage of students at the school you work at and a lot of the other Ivies come from the top 1%, the top 10% economically already, even though a degree from these places is thought to be a great tool for moving one up the economic scale in one's career. How could the most selective universities make things more fair so that someone who really is a student of promise but hasn't had all the advantages of a wealthier classmate has just as good a shot of getting into Harvard?
A few practical ways we could improve would be to to scale back preferences for so-called legacy admissions, children of alumni who tend to come from more affluent families. I think the universities, I'm speaking generally here, should resist the temptation to give an edge in admissions to children of wealthy donors who have given a substantial financial gift to the university. This can be hard to resist if the gift is very substantial. But I also think we need to do a better job recruiting first generation students from families who have not, where the family members have not gone to college themselves. And I even suggest, may get me into trouble in my neighborhood, a lottery proposal that among the 40,000 applicants to, say, Harvard or Stanford each year for 2,000 places, most of them, so the admissions officers tell us, are very well qualified, could do the work and could do it well. So I would like to experiment and tell the admissions officers to cull out those who are not well qualified, who couldn't flourish in these places. And then you'd be left with, I don't know, 25,000 or maybe 30,000. And what about doing a lottery to admit the 2,000 students from that group of well-qualified students? I have a hunch, Krys, that the level of discussion in my classes would go just as well as now. And it might send a message to the students and to their parents who are caught up in this admissions frenzy, might send a message that there's a lot of luck involved in this, and we're only formalizing what is in any case true, that admission is as much about luck as it is about getting that last 5 points on the SAT.
All right, let's go back to the phones. We have Henry calling us from the Colony, Texas. Hi, Henry.
Hi. I just wanted your discussion got me thinking about folks who, when they decide not to give money to, say, homeless folks, they rationalize their decision by saying, well, they're just going to go buy booze with it, or they're just going to go buy drugs with it. And like the whole meritocracy, kind of us versus them, and how flawed that thinking seems to me. I just wanted to get your guests' thoughts about that.
Thanks for calling.
Right. Well, thank you for that, Henry. I would suggest even a broader way of trying to address the attitudes that you are describing, and that is part of the problem that we've had in recent decades that's led to the polarization and that's led to this stark divide between winners and losers is that we have fewer and fewer public places and common spaces that gather people together from different walks of life, that enable people to encounter one another in the course of their everyday lives from across classes and races and ethnicities. And by these public spaces, I mean everything from public schools to parks, municipal centers, community centers, public transportation, playgrounds. I think that part of we need to try to recreate or renew the civic infrastructure of a shared democratic life. There's less and less class mixing these days, even in sports stadiums, which traditionally are one place where people gathered from different social and economic backgrounds. I think we need to do this deliberately because part of our problem is we're not accustomed to encountering one another across classes and across ethnic and racial divides in the course of our everyday lives. And this enables these attitudes that we've been discussing to harden. And so that, I think, is another, when you mention encountering people on the street, this is another important dimension of repairing the civic foundation of a shared public life.
This is Think. I'm Krys Boyd. We have an email here from Margaret who writes, One thing that worries me in this discussion is that we need to be careful we don't belittle or eliminate the idea that hard work and persistence should result in success. It would be a very difficult society if everyone, regardless of input, feels they have equal merit and rights to money and success. What do you think about that?
I think Margaret is right. I by no means would suggest that we should denigrate hard work. To the contrary, I think we should broaden our recognition of hard work and recognize the hard work of a great many people in a great many jobs who don't get paid very well, who don't enjoy much social recognition or esteem. We were speaking earlier about the essential workers during this pandemic. They work very hard, and yet they are not in jobs that typically enjoy high pay or high regard even, which is why the pandemic may be a turning point. So while it's true that we look at big earners, whether it's in sports like LeBron James or in business, Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates, of course, they've worked hard, but a great many people work hard who don't ascend to the heights, either economically or in terms of social recognition and prestige. And so it's a mistake, I think, to assume that success or wealth signifies superior hard work, because that forgets the hard work of a great many people who struggle to make ends meet and who don't enjoy the social esteem that the society should accord them.
What do you do to grapple with the role luck has played in your success?
Well, I guess the main thing is not to assume that whatever success I may have achieved is my own doing and mine alone to enjoy or to exploit. One of the experiments we did some time ago, I've been teaching this course for many years at Harvard on justice, which is essentially a course in moral and political philosophy and civic education. We filmed it and we made it freely available online to anyone, anywhere in the world who wants to watch it. And we were astonished at the response that people were actually wanted to watch lectures about moral and political philosophy online from all different backgrounds and walks of life, not just students. And I think for me, this was an experiment, not just in using new technology for education, but a way of trying to show that access to higher education should not just be a private privilege, but a public good. This is a small contribution. I don't want to inflate it by any means, but it's reminding ourselves of the role of luck in life, I think, can keep us humble. And humility, I think, is the civic virtue we need now.
Philosopher Michael J. Sandel is Ann T. and Robert M. Bass Professor of Government at Harvard University and author of The Tyranny of Merit, What's Become of the Common Good. Michael, thanks so much for spending this time with us.
Thank you, Krys. I've really enjoyed it.
You can like our page on Facebook. We're on Twitter at KERA Think. Subscribe to our podcast wherever you get podcasts by searching for KERA Think, or catch up on our website, think.kera.org. Again, I'm Krys Boyd. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.